Higher education should challenge and inspire students to reach their full potential, not shelter them from the realities of the world they are preparing to enter. Indeed, which is why I say failure is awesome. Statement I never thought I would say, but failure is awesome in the sense that you can learn from it. Okay, so one of the things, of course, with university campuses of late, and again, why do I talk about universities? I talk about universities because they are the place where we train the next generation of scientists. And so there has been a push to get rid of grading altogether, to get rid of poor grades and all this other kind of stuff in the vein of, not causing stress to students. And yeah, failure sucks. Been there, done that. I did that with a couple of college exams in particular, particularly in grad school at one point. And, it does happen. It does suck. But why get rid of it? If it's just to, protect students, then, well, you're not doing them any favors. Because failure ain't just a thing for college courses or, K through 12 courses or anything like that. Failure just ain't a thing just for that. So let's talk about this a little bit, because I like this article I read from a student, actually, who's writing in praise of Fs. Colleges and universities should not get rid of failing grades. I thought this was actually quite fantastic when I was reading this. So, on January 5th, 2024, Western Oregon University announced a bold change to its grading regime. Quote, "The letter grades of D and F have been axed in favor of a mark of no credit for undergraduates." WOU's provost, Jose Cole, clarified, I'm presuming that's the right way to pronounce the name, I may be incorrect on that, but clarified that this new system will not lower the university's academic standards, but rather, quote, increase retention and graduation rates. The university will no longer, quote, mask students' demonstrated abilities with a slew of poor marks, following the likes of Brown University and Hampshire College, which have already exchanged letter grades for alternative measures in some instances. By removing troublesome grades, WOU's administrators might conceivably be making a commendable decision to lower students' anxiety. After all, if failing grades prevent students from changing majors, cause them to drop out, or lower their chances to finding a job post-graduation, would it not be reasonable to refrain from handing them out? Yeah, failure sucks, and there are things that when you fail classes, it does have an impact on that, because transcripts are a thing for for employers, for, graduate schools, for a lot of things like that, but they are not themselves used to determine such things. The short answer, no. Simply ignoring the problem does not make it disappear. Instead of nixing the unsatisfactory grades from students' transcripts, WOU should consider how this decision will devalue the university's academic culture. Rigorous academic standards are a cornerstone of higher education, and the fear of receiving a failing grade has traditionally been a powerful motivator for students to put forth their best efforts. By removing the negative impact of failure from a student's GPA, there is a risk that some students may become complacent and less driven to excel academically. This could lead to a decline in the student body's overall academic performance and achievement. For one thing, I meant to forward this to Deb Philman, because I would be very curious to see what she thinks of this article and some of the commentary therein in that front. But it is true that for a lot of students, they're afraid to fail. And there is a bit of a negative stigma around failure. Yeah, failure sucks. You screwed up. It sucks. It feels terrible to do it. But there also has to be a certain mindset change that's involved with respect to failure. In that, if you failed, you can sit and mope on it, for sure. You can take the stigma that there is a weird sort of stigma that failure means you're like lesser than. If you failed at a class, you're lesser than. You're not as good, not as valued, and what have you. Not true in the slightest, but there is that stigma there. And so, it does drive you to try to succeed. But when you try your best and then you still fail, what are you to take from that? Let's continue a little bit before I go with that one. As an undergraduate myself, I can attest to the stress and anxiety caused by potentially earning a failing grade. In our credentialist society, one's college transcript can determine whether one gets a dream job or settles for a monotonous career that one would never wish on one's worst enemy. Now, I want to make a point on this in that a college transcript for most employers, for graduate programs in sciences, is one part of a whole that they attest to that. Because very often now, particularly if you're going into graduate school for really anything, but for STEM, as I've noticed, is that no, they're not just going to be looking at your transcript. They're going to be looking at what other things you've done. Were you doing research as an undergrad already? That's awesome if you were already doing that. What kind of scholarships did you get? What are you interested in? How do you go? What are your extracurricular things that you've been doing? There's a lot of those things. And of course, writing a good personal statement can overcome a whole crap ton of things. In this kind of thing too. So I would want to make a point here that a transcript is not a be-all and end-all here, as much as this particular student is saying that, though he's not wrong. There's a lot of things associated with credentials in this particular society as we have it right now, but not a be-all and end-all. As cumbersome as these fears may be, students should not simply be appeased by their teachers. Indeed, no. No. Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff in The Coddling of the American Mind, and Jonathan Rauch separately in The Constitution of Knowledge, both talk about the so-called safetyism culture, where you have to protect students from everything. They shouldn't be stressed out. They shouldn't be afraid of these different things. They shouldn't, blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. That's a teacher that's doing that is, not letting a kid try and fail as much as failure sucks, or letting a kid try and succeed sometimes. That happens too, right? You're not helping a student as much as they're afraid. You're not helping a student by just appeasing those fears and never letting them have to deal with it, to work through it. This is a thing with growing up with this too, in that, you have your fears of something happening. Yes, right? You do. Everybody does. Fear of failure being one of them. But if you never let students fail, how are you helping them overcome that fear? In this particular case, right? Think about it that way. If you are never letting students fail, to learn that there's more to it than just that. If you fail, fine, it happens. It does, and it sucks, particularly in some things where it is, very, very high risk of something bad happen for someone to fail, like medicine. This is why you do try to, get to the most competent and best people for the job with medicine in particular, because failure can mean somebody's life. Failure and other things can also mean somebody's life, like engineering, infrastructure engineering, civil engineering, I should say, that kind of thing. Failure there can mean bad things. And so being afraid to fail is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But appeasing students so that they never fail has to them particular problems to it, right? You end up with the situation of, okay, what are the students going to do in the real world when they get out of college, when there isn't someone who's going to not give them a D or an F, figuratively speaking, on their particular career or their particular decision or a report they have to write or something like that? That's not going to be happening amongst employers. That's not going to be happening in graduate school. That's not going to be happening in a lot of different places. And so, you don't need to coddle students that way, because then they don't know how to deal with it when it comes. Getting to fail at some point early on is a good thing to figure out for a student how they should navigate failure, how a student is going to do that themselves so they can know how to deal with it later on in their lives. And of course, they're not necessarily going to do it on their just entirely alone, though their own response to that failure is their own response. Nobody can do that for them. But oftentimes you may have colleagues around you who are going to be giving you advice on what to do in the situation. Things like that do happen too, but that is another thing. But on the whole, how do you get students to overcome a fear of failure if they don't ever fail? you have failure and you have immediately go to the catastrophizing thing of all these different evil things are going to happen. The other thing is, in a way, failure is part of science. Failure is part of doing science. And what do I mean by that? When you're doing a scientific thing on just like base level, you have a hypothesis, you set up an experiment to see if your hypothesis is correct or not. Just simplistic kind of thing. If your experiment is therefore successful, well, maybe then you've shown evidence to support your hypothesis. Okay. But if your experiment's a failure, you perhaps didn't show any evidence to support your hypothesis. Both of those things are good because in either case, you learn something. And that is the purpose of science, is the pursuit of the truth. So if you're treating failure as being an utter, stigma thing that should never be, then you're cutting yourself off from learning something at the same time. And that's not a lesson I want to give to students. Yeah, failure in a lot of things can suck. But as part of a scientific discipline, failure is actually an important thing to learning and to going forward to producing new knowledge. Now, there's, of course, different kinds of failure, because if you fail in the basics of setting up the scientific process to begin with, well, yeah, that's a different problem. But, those kinds of things need to be in here. So you need to overcome fear, but you also need to recognize fear of failure, I should say, that failure itself is an opportunity to learn something. And you can't get to that point if you don't face up to the fear of failure to begin with. And it doesn't mean you stop being afraid either. I don't think I've ever found somebody stop being afraid of failing in academia just because they failed once and realize it's not so bad. You may still have it there that you're a little afraid of that. You might still be very afraid, in fact, of that. But you know how to navigate through it. You know how to deal with that fear. And it may work out like that other time when you failed the first time and like, oh, hey, it's kind of okay. That kind of thing too. Failure is more nuanced, but failing grades are a good thing in that it gives you an opportunity to learn, and it tells you you do have more to learn about something, and there's something you misunderstood, you didn't quite get it right in the basics, and that's okay. When they enter, and this actually, I didn't read ahead, the student actually makes the point that I'm making. When they enter the professional environments, the university should be preparing them for their bosses will not be so kind. Swaddling students in a warm bundle of academic satisfaction prevents their learning valuable life and academic lesson how to respond to failure. What I just said! What I just said. I got there. He got there and I got there. Okay, there we go. Take the case of the Evergreen State College, which implements a narrative grading system that substitutes traditional letter grades with an academic statement. The university instructs students to revise their statements throughout their college careers. Such a system flips the conventional structure of higher education by tailoring educational outcomes to what students want, not what they earn. This approach coddles students instead of challenging them to rise to meet rigorous academic standards. It robs them of the opportunity to learn resilience and perseverance in the face of failure and overcome their fears, skills vital for success in any professional field after graduation. Indeed with this. Now, I can understand it's stressful to fail. It's stressful to be afraid to fail. Totally get it. But you're not going to get past it if you're just kind of coddled with it. And this is, I have a problem, actually. If the notion of a narrative statement where you're just revising it, that kind of thing, you end up potentially, I'm going to be a little bit more nuanced than he is here, potentially with students tailoring their statements to what they want, not what they earn. To say, I've learned enough, in this kind of thing, when maybe they really haven't. Okay. If it does take that particular perspective, let's presume for a moment that it does, that, students are going to write down what they want to hear for themselves, not what they don't want to hear, which is maybe what the truth is. Then that doesn't help them actually become scientists either, because in science, what are you after? What is, not what you want it to be. So in this case, yeah, no, don't do it for that either, because that doesn't help with the training of scientists with that kind of thing. By eliminating failing grades, Western Oregon University risks falling into the same trap of lowered expectations and devalued academic achievement. The traditional grading systems, with its potential for failure, is a transparent measure of student performance. Replacing a failing grade with a nebulous no credit designation is a form of grade inflation, through which actual academic mastery is obscured. This jeopardizes the credibility of WOU's degrees in the eyes of employers and of other educational institutions. Instead of eliminating failing grades altogether, a more balanced approach would be to provide robust academic support systems and resources to help struggling students succeed. Early intervention, tutoring, and academic counseling can help students overcome challenges and develop the skills they need to meet the university's high standards. Now, one point I want to make on this, because you can provide all the tools in the world that you want to provide. But if you don't want to learn, if you don't want to use those tools, if you don't want to try to succeed, then it doesn't matter how many things that you provide. It is your education if you are a student. It is not mine. It is not the teachers. It's not the professors. It's yours. You have to be the one to take the initiative to get an education, not just schooling. Schooling is not necessarily great education at this point, but an education is yours. You have to take charge of it. So yeah, lots of tools maybe to help, but it doesn't mean a dang thing if you don't want it. In the end, while the intention behind OU's new grading policy may be well-meaning, the potential consequences of doling out academic participation trophies should give the university pause. Higher education should challenge and inspire students to reach their full potential, not shelter them from the realities of the world they are preparing to enter. Indeed, which is why I say failure is awesome. Statement I never thought I would say, but failure is awesome in the sense that you can learn from it. You can learn a lot of things from it. You can learn the things that you need to learn about the discipline that you want to go into, but you can also learn how to be resilient when things go bat bleep wrong. Because they do go bat bleep wrong, usually frequently. That's my take on it. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all of it. Lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.